That's it. We are live. We are talking today about identity. One of my favorite topics. It's the area of where I've really established my expertise. The sense of identity, I think, is absolutely the foundation for everything we experience in life. Everything flows out of our sense of, what we believe about ourselves. We know there's things like confirmation bias. And so, once we establish kind of a real belief, and we've come around to, so what that means, I believe I'm lucky, I believe somehow I'm unworthy of love, right? That belief gets cemented into the subconscious. And then we start to automatically and subconsciously look for ways to confirm that belief, right? So it's amazing how much the sense of these core beliefs can just drive our behavior, even seemingly without our conscious consent. And those are the things, right? When we feel like, why do I keep making the same mistakes? Why do I, try and make all these changes and I pay this money, but ultimately once the support's gone or once I'm out of a program, why do I keep going back to, these kind of dysfunctional things that are confounding? I use one of your favorite words, right?
That's right. That's right.
And ultimately it's because there's something embedded in that sense of identity that's creating chaos. And when you start to root that out, you start to really create and own your identity, it is amazing how much clarity you will develop and how you'll start to feel this strength, right? And kind of you'll start to impress your will upon, your world and what's going on. So really excited to be able to define identity, talk about where it comes from, how to take ownership over it, and what happens when you don't have a strong sense of identity, and what happens when you start to take ownership. So covered a lot there, Mr. David Rosk. What do you have to say about this topic?
I'm actually going to bring up that word subconscious because I think it kind of freaks people out a little bit. They're like, this is this weird ethereal space that, what does that mean? And I heard somebody define that, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but he defined it as just just right under the surface. And he used an analogy. He said, your subconscious is that part of your brain that allows you to drive to, the gym in the morning without thinking about it. You can be on the phone, you can be doing, listening to music and singing, and you're driving there because you've just done it so many times. It's just that layer under the layer. And I think it's important to bring that up because I think some people think that there's something else controlling me that's like this weird, something. And, anyway, I just kind of wanted to start there.
Yeah, you've seen there's memes out there that kind of have the iceberg concept, right? So kind of the ice that's sticking out of the water is kind of the conscious awareness, and then everything that's underneath is that subconscious. Yeah. And there's crazy. I mean, the subconscious brain and what it's capable is right now, right? In any given moment, consciously, I'm able to take in a certain amount of information. It's limited, right? But I'm able to be, but your subconscious is taking it all in simultaneously and recording it. So it's amazing what's embedded within that. And there's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. I think we actually talked about this the other day on a call. Yeah. But it's a relay sensory information, right? So the things that are embedded in those deep beliefs, it basically signals to the RAS, hey, these things are important. Pay attention to these out in the world. Look for signs. It's why sometimes when we're, looking for a certain type of car, and maybe we're researching it, we're going to buy it, suddenly we notice them everywhere, right? And so we can signal. We can actually go into the RAS, right? There's certain ways to be able to uproot things that are in the subconscious that are maybe not serving us well. Yeah. And there's ways to impress upon the subconscious beliefs. Obviously we do it a lot through core values and a few other things. And when that gets entrenched, it's amazing how all of a sudden your mind, that kind of conscious, subconscious drive to look for ways to be in alignment with those things that matter most, and the difference in that is incredible. So, I'll start with defining identity because I was on a podcast recently, and the host asked me to define it, and I wasn't happy. I started it to go right into a story and didn't fully address the question, and I've been wanting to make up for that ever since. So, I wanted to address that, and then would love to hear what you think about that, Mr. Ross, and sure. Get your impression on that, but. Your identity is really a collection of these deep beliefs. There's a great theory of identity that was created decades ago, and it really talked about kind of a spectrum of identity from most mature to least mature. And so the least mature is the sense of we take on identity through the values and the beliefs of our culture, of our family, maybe of church. But we've never examined whether or not those beliefs actually fit us, right? We just kind of swallowed them whole. And so we develop this really rigid connection to them. And when people press upon them, they don't share them. They start to question, why we do what we do or why we believe. Because we don't have a deep understanding, it feels very threatening. It's like to feel like your identity is threatened can be terrifying. It's like getting exposed at the very core. Yeah. And so it tends to get a very rigid, kind of gnarly response, right? Mm-hmm. Tends to get a very judgmental, critical, kind of a harsh response. And so the idea is that we're supposed to, over time, ideally this period would start to be adolescence, but we start to really go deeper and to say, what is it that I actually believe, right? And why do I believe that? And in going through that process, we develop a deeper relationship, right? A really secure foundation. And all of a sudden, it's almost like we relax into it, the sense of, well, I know why I do what I do. I know what's important to me. And if someone comes that doesn't share my beliefs, I don't feel threatened by that, right? Because I'm secure in who I am. And so it really allows you then to develop much better, healthier relationships. It allows you to be a better leader, right? When you understand what it is that you believe. So we're going to go into what are the core beliefs that kind of matter around yourself and how to develop, core beliefs that I think empower us to be the very best true north versions of ourselves. So an identity, so it's a mixture of these core beliefs. It's a mixture of what motivates us and understanding that. I think that can often feel mysterious as well. And then it's a mixture of kind of understanding our unique character strengths, our characteristics, right? Some people call it personality. I like character strengths, but they kind of define, the essence of who we are, of how we respond to adversity, of how we best impact others and how we relate to others. So that's my quick definition. There's that thing of it's what we identify with, but you got to be careful with that, right? Identity is one of those things that's been used in so many different contexts in ways that I think are really unhealthy. Ideally, our identity helps us to know more of who we want to become. And so when we start to connect our identity to things outside of ourselves, whether it's our political affiliation, whether it's our religion, whether it's our sexual orientation, my feeling is like, how do we become more of that? It usually just means we become more extreme. And so I love the idea of really focusing on, hey, if I'm focused on becoming more, faith is very important to me, right? That's a defining aspect of who I am. My family is. But how I interact with that is I engage them with an open-ended sense of curiosity, of wanting to inspire them to learn about who they are. I engage them with a sense of trying to apply wisdom, but also just having fun and engaging with playfulness and that. And so that helps me to understand who I want to be more of. And the more I'm aligned with that, the happier I feel, the more successful I am. I just said quite a mouthful there. What do you think about that? Anything you'd add to that? Anything that you'd question or change? You're muted. You're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. So as you were talking, I was writing down some words, and some of the words that were rising to the top for me were, like the word convictions, right? And it's like, that's a strong word. So obviously it kind of begs then there's a hierarchy to it. There's those things that rise to the top, right? Yeah. So one of the characteristics, like when I think of identity, well, how am I different from you, right? Some of those things that rise to the top for me are different from some of those things that rise to the top for you. You often say, follow the clues, right? And some of those things might be, okay, what makes me angry? What is it that makes me happy? What gives me goosebumps? It's those characteristics that seem to be, the cream, if you will, that rises to the top that we can see, and we can kind of, touch it just a little bit more than the other things. I think those are the things that we need to kind of laser in on. And then also one of the things that I love that you kind of touched on was this idea of like observing. You can sit across the room and observe yourself and with a sense of curiosity look at, man, I wonder, what are some of those things that rise to the top for David Osk, right? Yeah. And it's kind of fascinating if you just tap the brakes, look at some of those things that, like I said, that are important to me, that are precious to me, that are, give me goosebumps, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's those things that are those clues, right? That we tend to would be wise to follow. That makes those are the things that are unique to me. And then also, I think it's important to understand that identity helps us to Actually remember my mom and dad talking about this when I was young, this idea of where I start and end and where
Yeah.
someone else starts and ends. And because I think that when you lack identity, there's something kind of fascinating about that,
It's
right?
good. Yeah.
You're taking clues from somebody else. You're worried about what they're thinking. Socially, there's some anxiety there. And of course, after doing some of this deep work, even last night, I spoke to our men's group at church, and I'm not really sure how many guys were there, maybe 75 or something like that. And in the past, honestly, I would walk into that room a little nervous, like, man, kind of comparing myself to other men, that kind of stuff. And what's fascinating after doing some of this work, right? I walk in there with a sense of mission and a real anticipation just to be me and let them be them. And at the same time, kind of swing for the fence with regards to they asked me to speak, right? So, man, I'm going to let them have it. Like I mean, it's
That's right.
it's the whole 9 yards of everything that's really important to me. And so it felt really good to not worry, I mean, again, I'm human, right? So I want it to land well, and I don't want to come across like being a bozo. But at the same time, I wasn't that preoccupied with that. And I was way more interested in my impact, my dent in that space last night. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love, and going through this, with at this point, hundreds of individuals, right? Taking entire organizations through some of this work. It's amazing how people have done, as you talk about boundaries, have done really good work. They've done boundaries courses. People who have done, marital work, people have done group kind of leadership work, and how going through this they found was really like, this is the primer, right? That when you get this clear, all that work sticks so much more. Because when you have a secure sense of who you are, like you said, right, it really helps to clarify the boundaries. So trying to do that work first, they found, while still beneficial, ultimately it had exponentially more benefit when they could start from a clear place. Kind of the same thing. I've got someone I'm working with right now that has done a tremendous amount of communication work and things like that. In his marriage, he's a leader of a very large company. But I said, hey, I want you to pause actually any more couples work. Right. And I know that seemed counterintuitive, but so let's get clear in who you are and get secure there, because you are going to relate to your wife completely differently once you have a more secure understanding of who you are, right? Once you feel more sure that the things that you're arguing about now will probably be fairly insignificant, later. And sure enough, he's about 6 weeks into it. It's amazing. They're having some of the best weeks that they've ever had. He's not getting triggered, right, into some of those vicious loops, those feedback cycles. Because he's able to exit out and recognize, my need to be right, my need to always win arguments. Once an argument started, he had this mentality, I'm going to finish it, right? Those things don't matter anymore. His identity isn't rigidly attached to those things. Now he's recognizing, no, I want to be a loving husband that makes my wife feel safe and secure in my presence. I want her to feel like she is the biggest priority. And so he's able to make actions that align out of that because he's just really clear in that. So does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's one of the clues, right, is if you don't have a real sense of yourself, there's really a sense of searching still. Like, you're looking for something.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you're alone, there's that kind of, okay, what's going on here? What do I like? What should I do? What lights me up? All that kind of stuff. And even
so true.
In a social setting. And by the way, right, this really comes front and center with marriage. We've been sold this bill of goods that, whether it's the knight in shining armor or, the most beautiful woman in the world is somehow going to solve our every need.
Yep.
Well, what is it that really feels good, right? I'll kind of speak for men here, right? It feels great to show up in a way where I know that I'm offering my wife strength and encouragement. I'm actually bringing her something. I'm bringing her me. The fullest expression of who I am, as opposed to, you're really letting me down, sweetheart. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's a paradigm shift when you understand, that authenticity. You feel secure in who you are, that you begin then to give as opposed to be seeking all the time.
So that's such a powerful comment, right? I think there's so much of people who are searching for things, whether it's connection, right? That they want to have greater success, they want happiness, they want autonomy, they want peace, but they haven't started by first defining, what are those things that actually give them that,
Yeah.
right? But how would they define those things? It's amazing when you start from a strong sense of identity, like you're able to choose autonomy because you understand what makes you you, right? Self-governed behavior with moral agency. You've already predetermined those things. And so you increase your sense of autonomy. I've been doing some work recently with kind of some career coaching. And it's just really because, like, what is the basis for the reason why you make decisions that you do? And if you don't know who you are, if you don't have a strong foundation for understanding what your unique strengths are, you don't understand what motivates you to do your very best, what gets you into the ideal flow state, right? Then why are you choosing one career versus another?
Right.
Why are you choosing one relationship versus another?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, research shows that it's often kind of whimsical, right? It's often based off of emotions. It's based off of in the moment. I think the more you are approaching life, a solid sense of identity should give you a self-strategy for how you solve everyday problems, for how you approach your marriage, for how you, do your very best work. So now you're approaching things with a sense of, real intentionality. And the results you're going to get are undeniably going to be superior, right? I'd love anybody to debate me on that. I don't see how you could.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's a fascinating thing, right? Just to be kind of create this really black and white moment here. Lisa married me, right? She didn't marry the neighbor, before I was self-employed, right? They hired me for a reason. They didn't hire me so that I could act like some guy in the cubicle down the row, right?
Yeah.
It's like the way that we show up is just so important. Not only does it bring those people, right, that we love and that love us, does it bring them more fulfillment, more joy, but it also creates so much more peace, just less internal conflict. And, we show up in a way that actually benefits not only us, but everybody else. People want to be with us, the real us, not somebody else or some version of us that we think that they're going to like more. That authenticity piece is, as you get the shovel out and start digging, it just gets richer and richer and more peaceful and actually more strong. Like there's a strength to it that is just, it feels right. It feels resilient.
So if identity is, right, these things that we're saying it is, and obviously we believe it is, we see this, right, we experience it. Why is it so hard for so many people to get really clear on who they are, right? I mean, I think this is one of the biggest struggles, I think, right now. And a lack of identity really does. It creates tremendous anxiety. We tend to burn out more. We tend to make choices that we regret, all kinds of things like that. And I will make the premise that we start life really for the first, kind of through childhood, passively taking on identity.
Sure.
Really that's by necessity. There's a sense of needing to understand our place in the world. Our parents help us to cultivate and understand our strengths. And so as we're taking on that feedback, right, sometimes labels get attached to us. Sometimes within a family system, right, we're trying to figure out, am I the family star? Am I the family court jester, right? Am I the black sheep? And so all of a sudden we kind of take on, and it may not be that that's an identity that we really wanted. It just happened to have been, that's what was left. There's a variety of reasons on how that happens. But somewhere along the lines, that's a kind of adolescence, we're supposed to start to break off from that, right? We're supposed to start to say, all right, who am I independent of some of these, even social groups, right? Of, the school, and you get identity from there. And that's another thing. You get identity from a variety of different places. We're amazing adaptational creatures. So the minute, right, we go into an environment, we go into a school, we meet a new group of people, we're immediately observing, right? Like, what are the rules of this group? How do they speak to each other? What are the different roles that people have? What can be talked about? What can't? What gets punished for being, done? And if we don't go into a clear sense of who we are, we just kind of figure out, who does this group need me to be? And we kind of mold and assimilate to that, right? And in school, like, if we don't fit the conventional norms, unfortunately, we often get labels attached to us that can be really damaging. So somewhere along the way, we're supposed to say, all right, these labels and this identity has been attached to us, but is that really who I am, right? And we're supposed to discard what doesn't work, and we're supposed to start to own. But there's no real good framework that currently exists, right, on how, I think, parents, how churches, some people do it really well, right? There's Obviously, a lot of people out there do have a strong sense of identity, but in general, I don't think there's a really great framework that's helping adolescents to emerge out of that time period with a clear sense of understanding who they are. So they're picking careers, they're picking jobs, they're moving in a direction, right, that really has deep authenticity and points true north. Does that make sense?
Oh man, the big question, how do you get there? Of course, at that point in our lives that, the self-actualization, I wrote, you use the word adapt. And I thought, man, wouldn't it be neat to have a process by which you adapt to you, right? Not adapt to your environment.
Yep.
You're like, oh, wow. As you self-actualize and understand what are those things that I really love, right? What is it that lights me up? Convictions, stand upon bedrock, all that stuff. But I think it actually begins, right, with a guide. When we were children, right, we've got parents, I mean, and other people in our lives that should, right, guide us to that place of self-actualization, as opposed to dump on us all of the shoulds, right, the societal shoulds, that kind of stuff. So I think the first step in getting there is really for the guide to ask you the right questions.
Yeah,
that's good. I mean? It's the power of the question is absolutely transformational. And that you have a good guide when they're not telling you, hey, you should do this, you have to do these things, or you don't fit in, or you're not valued.
Yeah.
What would it look like then for a good and noble and mature guide, right, to ask, hey, Dr. Andy, what is it that lights you up, brother? I want to get behind that. Yeah. Even when I say that, right, I get goosebumps. It's like because why? Because it's right. Yeah. When Parker and Kate, I mean, they're teenagers, right? When we're in this
process. 2 kids.
Yeah, my kids, they're self-actualizing right now. I mean, about an hour ago, Parker and I sat in my office here and had this great conversation, kind of popping some bubbles and shining some light on some insecurities. And hey, why am I thinking this? Why am I struggling with this? And that kind of stuff. And it's not my goal, especially as a 17-year-old young man who's, could probably whip my butt. I mean, he's a big kid. It's not my goal to sit there and tell that kid what to think. I'm asking him questions. What do you value? Yeah. What do you think about that? Well, guess what happens in that moment? He feels honored, right? Because I want to know what he thinks. He's in a safe space to begin to ponder those things. But then what happens? As he, says these things out loud, he gets the ownership of those things, right? And as his dad, right, I'm like, heck yeah, I totally see that in you, buddy. You own it. In fact, he grabbed his journal and he starts, writing some of these things down. I threw him a highlighter across the room. I'm like, highlight that one. Awesome. We don't need to forget, because tomorrow, right, when you need to course correct, you're going to forget. So go back to that page and be like, oh yeah. That really stood out to me today.
Now that is some good true north parenting leadership, right? This idea, because if we're not really secure in who we are, right, then oftentimes our kids having opinions, beliefs, strengths maybe, right, that we're uncomfortable with, that are different than ours, can create insecurity, right? And we can give off the message that what they believe or who they are, right? And that's not saying that we can't come in sometimes, right? If they've are making conclusions that are leading in the directions that are, self-destructive or something like that, of course.
Sure.
But in general, helping them to be able to really, kind of do the inner size, the inner exploration, right? It's where we experience God, right? Go in there and start to create quiet time, right? And to help them to create clarity out of chaos, convictions out of confusion, so that they emerge with a deeper sense, right? Instead of, well, I really feel like I feel strong here, but for some reason I feel like Dad's telling me this is wrong. And now all of a sudden I'm kind of splitting, right? And I feel like I should disown something about myself. So yeah, what a great example there.
Thanks.
I know I put in the description here that, we experience different versions, right, of identity crisis when we're not really clear and have a strong, secure sense of who we are. And the most extreme cases of that is when we see someone maybe going through a midlife crisis and they make really radical decisions, right? They leave a marriage of, a couple of decades. I just was talking to someone over the weekend that happened, right? Her husband, after having 5 kids together, right? A beautiful house, and just all of a sudden had an identity crisis and started making really erratic decisions, super selfish decisions, right? It was like everything that he thought he was, because he didn't really have a secure sense. He started to question it and kind of felt like this isn't, I'm dissatisfied. And so I got to find somewhere. He's just looking in all, what I think, the wrong directions, right? Ways that are going to cause long-term damage with his kids and things like that. But that's an extreme example, right? I mean, there's also much more mild versions that we live with every day, but really can create a lot of distress. They lead to greater degrees of burnout, all kinds of issues that when we resolve them, right, we start to experience the flip side of that. Does that make sense?
Oh man, the idea of, you fought for so much in your life, right? I mean, you've been, you think about the example of somebody who's been married 20 years, right? Built a life, I mean, kids and marriage, and gone through who knows how many, obstacles and battles. And then all of a sudden you're willing to throw that away. I mean, it absolutely begs the fact that there's no bedrock there. You were using external, things, whatever, even people for that matter, to help define what's going on in here, which is not even possible. I'm not sure if we've even mentioned the word authenticity right now, but you've often used the phrase or explained authenticity comes from the word author. And I love this idea of so author means, right? It's written down. I mean, like it's, and I think inside of us too, when we think of bedrock, like it's written in stone. And so when we find out what's that stuff that's written in stone in us, right? That's not going to change. Nobody's going to change my mind. It may hold a gun to my head and get me to say something I don't believe, right? But the things that will not change, because I know what's going on in my head, and I stand upon these things and I believe these things with all my heart, and they're good and right and noble and pure and just awesome, all that kind of stuff, right? It's that stuff when we find out what that is, label it, right? Literally the word, have a vocabulary to describe it.
Yeah.
Well, then all of a sudden you get to those crisis moments, whether it's a midlife crisis or, hey, a choice that you've got to make in your family or whatever it is. Well, then, you have that stuff that's written in stone, which is the matrix at which you make decisions. And if it doesn't align with these things, well, great. Hey, this is a clear yes, it's a clear no. Otherwise, what are we doing? Lick your finger, hold it up, and I'm hoping to not disappoint people around me, and you just go whichever way the wind blows. Yeah. And that's a recipe for absolute disaster.
Love what you're saying. I mean, it's really the idea that true north is something that remains stable, right? Constant. The latitude, longitude. If you're ever looking for true north, you can count on the fact and trust that it'll always be there, right? And that's the idea. I think when we really develop a clear understanding of who we are, that there's certain, a lot of life is uncertainty, and there's no this idea you're going to create perfect certainty is an illusion. That's not at all what we're talking about. We're not talking about perfection, but the idea that there are a few core things, a few convictions, right? A few things that are so sacred and so deep and such deep convictions about who you are, that people that know you, your kids, the people you lead, it's like, man, I can count, I know David Oss to always be someone I can go to for encouragement, inspiration. I can count on him to be a man of integrity, right? All of a sudden, because that's so consistent, that it allows people to feel safe and trust that. And instead of worrying, like, is he pulling my chain? Is David really telling me the truth? Or is he just telling me what I want to hear, right? They can count on that, and it frees their brain up then to focus on bigger things, like figuring out who they are, understanding what motivates and inspires them. So it's amazing, right? When you have those sense of things that are authored, that are written down, that remain stable and kind of constant, just the power of that, right?
You can't match that. There's no substitute for it.
Yeah. And I know the motivation piece is something I wanted to just quickly come back to, because I've worked with some individuals who are, incredibly high achievers, right, at the top of their industry. And as I went through, right, in kind of this process with them, it turned out that a lot of what is motivating them is a deep sense of insecurity, right? And so while they're highly skilled, they're amazing at what they do, the technical understanding of their jobs, their ability to create profits, the ability to do sales at an absolute elite level is remarkable. They're also being driven because maybe they were not picked for the kickball team, right, in grade school. I mean, I've had someone who was rejected in high school, And that rejection was so powerful, right? That they were going through life with this almost kind of immature sense of showing, now that I've got power and I've got money and I've got fame, now I'm desirable, and making decisions that wrecked multiple marriages. And that's not an uncommon thing, right? There are a lot of really successful leaders out there who leave just a wake of damage beneath them because they're being driven by deep, pain and insecurity. And when you replace that, because you understand, hey, intrinsically, I'm not motivated because I'm trying to prove that I'm amazing, that I'm right, I always win, right? But I'm driven by the fact that these are choices that align with my values, right? These are strengths that I want to get better at, and they have impact and purpose, right? They're driven by autonomy and purpose, so that, you really feel you're coming from a place of wholeness and you're investing in people. I've seen that's the same leaders, right, who are being followed because of their title and people are terrified of them, suddenly investing, having deep emotional conversations with their team, right? And all of a sudden their team, while they were profitable before, they reached whole new levels because they were investing in those people, creating real deep connections. Does that make sense?
Oh man, the word agreement kind of rose to the top there for me. It's when we get hurt, especially when we're younger, right? Well, it's really easy to say, well, that's never going to happen again. And we will go to extreme lengths to make sure that it doesn't, including being a real jerk sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's fascinating though is what is it that, kind of undoes that agreement, right? Well, when you understand that I'm not looking for everybody else's cues and clues and permission and this kind of stuff. When I walk into a room, right, I'm way more concerned about, hey, I get to have a great impact here because it feels really good to be me. Yeah. It's an intrinsically driven life, as opposed to I'm worried about an external stimulus or I'm looking for it even. It's like, man, I know exactly what's going on right now because I'm the one in charge of me. And, that it just feels great.
So powerful. And that sense of, if you think about what gets into the subconscious, things that tend to get rooted in subconscious, especially in those formative years, things that happen with repetition and consistency, right? So you tend to have maybe family sayings, right? Or there's family rituals or certain things that just got kind of burned into that subconscious, but also things that had strong, powerful emotions attached to them. So painful moments, right? And it's like that memory and that experience and that sense of meaning that we attach to it, gets etched into our subconscious. And that's ultimately what ends up often driving then behavior, sometimes decades later.
Right.
What's beautiful though, and we've got an exercise that does this, is you can actually change, right? Even if you have a memory that endures, the meaning you attach to it can shift. That author piece, right? What the author and the story, the narrative I've created around these things isn't so much of me being victimized. It's not about me being rejected, right? And feeling ashamed and unlovable. But I realized that moment made me stronger, right? That moment, or I'm choosing now to allow that moment to make me more secure, to feed into my kids or whatever it might be, right? But I'm going to choose to develop strength around that. And I'm going to choose to benefit others because this thing is only making me more of who I am.
Love that.
That can be a game changer, right?
Powerful.
So as we start to shift in the last part of this, where would you tell us? So someone says, hey, look, I feel lost and I'm trying to find my sense of identity. I know we've certainly left clues and we've talked about, and even I think mentioned a few of the things, but where would you start to direct someone to help them to really discover who they uniquely, authentically are?
I think the kind of goes back to what I said earlier, really. And this is not to, obviously you have a program that ushers everybody through this, right? But this isn't to necessarily sell something here. This is, this is a process, especially if you've got some, wounds and you've got some things you're just hanging on to that you're, it causes some anxiety just to even, tap the brakes and, look under the hood just a little bit. You need somebody to kind of just help you usher you into that space and just say, hey man, you're safe here. Let's start asking some good questions. And so I think there is this idea that it kind of takes a bit of a guide or a team or a progression of sorts to kind of start, asking some meaningful questions and that kind of thing, so that's where I would start. Honestly, I think that's the best place.
Yeah. You can't, certainly you can't give away something you don't have, right? So that sense of if it's not internalized or if you don't have it, it's hard to just be able to discover it without some type of guidance from someone who's created or experienced that transformation. And I love what you say, right? Like, I think both you and I are so passionate about this topic that while, yes, we do have a program, right? Like, we're happy to help give people guidance, to give recommendations. Like, we understand the benefits that and the ripple effect that when you change this and transform at that core foundational level, it changes everything that flows out from underneath that. So whether you engage with us or go through our program, or you're finding it somewhere else, like, we don't care. We just are hoping more people will do this work because we understand the benefits of that.
I thought of something here. So when my son came in here, he made a comment about my sister, Kirsten. He goes, there's something so different about her. He said, she just glows. and he said, she's one of the most authentic people I've ever met. And I feel so safe around her. And so when I think, so another place, people can start, and you use this phrase, authentic exemplar, right? Somebody in your life who just seems like they got something that I don't have. There's a strength, there's a peace, there's a forwardness about them, a generosity, a curiosity, like they're on mission, but it just seems right. It's not like they're taking things from anybody. I would say just start observing people like that.
Yeah.
And be like, man, what is it that they've got that I don't, that I want to learn. I want to enter into that deeper space.
That's where all the stuff, the material, right, that came out of that process for me.
Yeah.
As a psychologist, I was working with people and doing, what was great work and had a practice that I loved, but somewhere in there was still something missing, right? Here I am achieving, I'm building a practice, it's doing great. But I still felt this emptiness inside, and still felt this deep kind of boyish insecurity.
Right.
And so I was trying to say, like, on the spectrum of wellness from -10 to +10, like, how do I start to really get further on the plus side, right? How do I get to that +7, +8 and have those more consistently? And so I started thinking about the people in my life who just seemed to have this incredible enthusiasm for the life they lived, right? That they had holistic success, that it wasn't just, hey, we're really great businessmen or, great community leaders, but their marriages were beautiful, right? They really loved their kids. They seemed to have a deep spiritual sense of like a depth and fulfillment. So I started to really look at and say, like, what in the world are they doing that I'm not doing? And I found certain commonalities. I mean, that's really it, right? And I put on the curiosity hat and started kind of digging in as engineering a psychological solution, something I love to do. And I started to realize, like, oh, I think they're doing this, right? So we started looking at the values. Like, each one of them would constantly talk about what was important to them, right? I mean, they would often have their 5 values, like, at any given point. So you could see that they clearly knew those things that pointed true north to them. They knew what drove or motivated them. I mean, these people had incredible energy going like deep into life. And I think they lived maximum amount of their life in flow state. So I realized, well, they must be intrinsically motivated because you can't be in flow state without that. And then I realized that they really knew what their strengths were, right? And they applied them in the work they did and in their relationships in ways that was deeply rewarding and virtuous. So those are the pieces. And whoever you work with, if you're on this journey or you're looking to find it, if the people that you're working with are not guiding you into an internal exploration, you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Right. If it's like, hey, we're going to help you get the right exercise and diet and those things. I'm not saying that diet's not amazing. It is. Right. But ultimately, when you have a deeper understanding of, like, even we've worked with people that have had major turnarounds in their health, but like, what lights you up when you exercise, right? If you're trying to force yourself to do things that ultimately you really don't enjoy, you're creating all this inner resistance. Yeah. And I'm not saying not to do uncomfortable things. There's a ton of stuff I do every day that's uncomfortable, right? But the more secure you are, guess what? You actually avoid uncomfortable things a lot less. Yeah. You remove unnecessary friction. Does that make sense?
Love that. The unnecessary. Holy moly. Yeah, that's great. Wow.
Yeah. I feel like so much of what gets people stuck, right, is because they don't have a deep understanding of who they are. There's all this internal uncertainty, and so there's so much internal resistance, and it eventually just feels overwhelming, right? There's a way to be able to remove that so that things you're moving towards almost have magnetic gravitational pull. They're pulling you forward, right? And all of a sudden, you start creating more momentum. You start getting more done by doing less, right? You get more fulfillment. You get all these things. And yet somehow it's like you're actually, I'm achieving more, I'm more fulfilled, but I'm actually less busy.
Right.
I feel like I've seen that with you.
It's funny that, I mean, there's seasons, right, where you kind of ebb and flow and so on. But, in the last year, I feel like my life has been so much more defined, as I'm growing in authenticity, right? As I'm growing in that just self-awareness, the things that I'm saying yes to and no to that are just more meaningful to me. I've turned down a lot of things in the last year. And part of it was hard because I feel like I was letting some people down, right? That I kind of respect and I like, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I knew full well that if I started to say yes to some of those things, well, guess what? My sense of joy, my own authenticity, right? My generosity, those things that I like to be about, my inspiration, all that kind of stuff, it would start to dwindle because I would be just fragmented and stressed out and worn out and just too much on my plate. So on a very basic level, the authenticity piece really helps you to, protect what's important.
Yeah. Love that. And we can wrap up. I'd love to talk about, and maybe this is next time, but, I've talked about the ratio, the thriving, right? The positive to negative. And I know that theme can seem maybe not personal, but, the key to really being able to effectively create more thriving ratios of, I'm having more positive feelings of joy, of peace, of fulfillment, of feeling satisfaction. Like the more you know yourself, happiness comes as a byproduct of doing things that affirm of those, core aspects of who you are. When you feel like, man, I felt like I really crushed it today with my wife and my kids, right? I was so intentional. I was really deeply involved. I was in flow state, right? Down on the floor with my kids, just having a blast, which, we're reading them Harry Potter right now. And, the play that comes out of it, I'm probably enjoying more than I should. And so it's just really fun, right? And so the happiness and satisfaction that brings me is really remarkable. And then that creates this flow, for the rest of the day. It makes it easier to do more positive things. So, and this is true for your business, right? That identity piece will help you get out of vicious cycles and help you redirect to virtuous cycles. So maybe we can chat about that next time.
Love it. Love it.
All right, brother, man, love this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me here.